In this lecture, we're going to learn how to use template refs with the Composition API. Template refs, as we've learned, are a way to interact with the elements in a component. They expose the native browser API for interacting with elements. It's a feature available in case any other solution is not viable. Working with template references is a slightly different process than before. Let's look at how it's done. In the template, let's add a button at the bottom of the template. We're going to add an event listener to this button. However, for this demonstration, we're not going to use Vue's binding syntax for listening events on elements. We'll use template references. The syntax for using template references in the template hasn't changed. We can add the ref attribute to the button element. The name for the reference will be button. The next step is to add an event listener. However, there is a problem. In our setup function, we don't have access to the this keyword. It's because the setup function is called before the component is instantiated. Template references are accessible via the $refs variable. If we want to access template references, we need to create a variable that'll store the reference. This might be confusing, but just follow along. I'll explain what's going on in a moment. At the top of the setup function, we'll create a variable called button. Its value will be the ref function with a value of null. The ref function isn't limited to storing primitive values. It's able to store template references too. If we plan on using a reactive reference to store a template reference, its initial value must be null. Next, in the return statement, we can add this reference to the list of values to return. When the setup function is called, Vue will create the reactive reference. It won't be bound to anything until the component has been mounted. During the mounting phase, Vue will notice we have an element with the ref attribute. The value for the ref attribute must correspond to the name of the reactive reference we have in our setup function. Vue will assign the element to the reference. We'll be able to interact with the element in our setup function after the component has been mounted. We can proceed to add an event listener. In our setup function, it's important we add the event listener after the component has been mounted. If we were to attempt to add the event listener, we'll receive an error because the button variable will be null. Luckily, we talked about lifecycle functions already. We already have the onMounted lifecycle function in our function. We can update the callback function by calling the addEventListener function on the button.value property. Keep in mind, we're still using a reactive reference. If we want to access the value, which in this case is the element, we'll need to access it via the value property. That's where Vue will store the element. The name of the event we'll listen to will be the click event. Next, in the callback function, we'll log a message to let us know if the button was clicked. Let's test the button in the browser. If I press the button, the message gets logged from the event listener's callback function. Great! We've learned how to use template references with the Composition API. It might seem a little confusing because there are two types of references we're working with. To add clarity, let's talk about the differences. In the template, we added the ref attribute to create a template reference. A template reference is an object that allows us to interact with the HTML element in the document. In our setup function, when we call the ref function, we're creating a reactive reference. A reactive reference is an object that's being observed for changes. We mainly use reactive references for storing primitive values, but it can be used to store a template reference. That does it for now. I'll see you in the next one.